Well, howdy friends, Brian Flechsig of Mad River Outfitters in the Midwest Fly Fishing Schools, and welcome back to another one of our fly tying tutorials. As always friends, we appreciate you being here. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss an episode. Hit that like button, and always remember that if you watch our videos regularly, please consider supporting Mad River Outfitters so we can continue to do these. I actually like doing these. It's a lot of fun. So today I'm going to walk you through a fly that I came across many years ago, probably 30 plus years ago, when I read The Soft Hackled Fly by Sylvester Neames. And as many of you may know, and if you don't, you're going to find out real soon that I am a soft hackled fly addict. When I read this book and started learning about soft hackles, it absolutely changed my life. It changed how I trout fish. And there isn't a day go by that I don't hardly tie or fish soft hackles. This is just my my recent tyings here, getting ready for big trout season here in Ohio. And those flies go with me anywhere in the world. So also, I found this fly in this kind of legendary, The Family Circle's Guide to Trout Flies. This fly I'm going to show you today is actually in this book in the dry fly version. But the fly we're going to take a look at, again, one that I carry. I mostly fish it in the wet fly version, but also carry it in a dry fly and a nymph version, which I'll show you versions of and how to tie those. But the fly today is called Tups Indispensable. So actually, this fly is often touted as one of the most famous trout flies of all time, although you really don't hear about it much these days, and I doubt you're going to find it in a fly shop or a catalog. So if you want some of these, you're going to have to tie them yourself. They're very effective when trout are taking pale midges or mayflies like sulfurs, but I've used it year-round as an attractor, and a lot of times with great success. It's really one of my go-to wet flies or soft hackles. The fly was created by tobacconist and part-time pro fly tyer R.S. Austin sometime around 1890 in Tiverton, Devon in the southwest of England. The fly became so popular that it did draw the attention and admiration of the legendary G.E.M. Skews, author and famous fly fisherman who's often credited with the invention of modern nymph fishing. Skews once wrote, "By the early 1900s, the fly had become so popular that Austin became utterly sick of tying it, and one of his customers said that the Dorsetshire River stank of Tups Indispensables from Maiden Newtown down to the sea." The dressing, though, was kept a secret by Austin and Skews. The pattern was said to contain magic dubbing. The Tups part of the name refers to a ram, a male sheep that is used for breeding. In Britain in those days, farmers used a sponge or a rag soaked in dye and then tied to the underside of the ram. In the morning, they would inspect their flock to see which females had dye stained on their backs from being tupped by the ram. Eventually, after the death of Austin, the magic dubbing was finally revealed by Skews in a 1934 article in the Fly Fishers Club Journal. The recipe was such: 1/2 of wool from a ram's testicles, 1/4 lemon yellow spaniel or fox fur, 1/4 pale pinkish and very fine fur from a hare's mask, and a bit of red mohair or seal's fur mixed in. When I first came across this fly, of course, I was not able to find this magic dubbing or magic ingredient in any fly shop or catalog, so of course I spent countless hours chasing rams around the fields of Missouri where I grew up, to no avail. So eventually, I decided to come up with my own recipe for the magic dubbing, and so far, it's worked out well for me. So instead of wool from a ram's testicles, eventually, and actually it's been about 10 or 12 years ago, when the Senyo's laser dub came out, and when I saw it, I knew that it was going to be perfect to mix this dubbing. And my recipe calls for about half hot pink, again, Senyo's laser dub, and then I go about 1/4 tan and about 1/4 red. And I just kind of mix it up, and I don't mix it completely. I just kind of do this number with it until it blends okay. I do want a little bit of that red to show up. I just think it kind of looks like blood or veins or something in the bug. But this is really such an easy bug. It calls for just a few materials. And we'll start, of course, with the hook that I'm using. And the hook is the hook that I tie almost all of my soft hackles on. And that is the Tiemco 5262. And for those of you that have followed along, I tie soft hackles. About 90% of all soft hackles I tie them in a size 14. Sometimes I'll go to a 12, sometimes I'll go to a 16, but almost all of them are size 14. So, of course, you'll mount your hook and your vise, and then I am using the Ultra Thread, the UTC Ultra Thread 70 denier, and you use the yellow. The original Tups pattern called for golden silk, and I use the 70 denier Ultra Thread from Wopsy. And of course, you're just going to start your thread near the eye of the hook, and you take it back to the bend of the hook, as we do with almost all flies that we tie. And 3 other materials in this fly. And the original called for tan. I have also seen it. In fact, in Sylvester Neam's book, it's shown with a light dun tail and hackle. And that's where I first learned how to tie the fly. And so I've always used the light dun, and I use a hen saddle. You can get these in a variety of different places. Metz, of course, Whiting Farms, a few other manufacturers. Of course, you're going to look on matterforoutfitters.com. And the hen saddle feathers are going to be used for the tail, and then also going to be used for the soft hackle collar on this fly. So I'm going to take one of the larger feathers off of this hen saddle, and I'm just going to strip off the scientific amount of a bunch of fibers off of the quill. I literally just stripped them right off. I'm going to bunch them up, maybe even up the tips just a pinch if I have to. And then, as I normally do with most tails, I'm going to hold those feathers in my, or fibers, excuse me. I'm going to hold those fibers in my right hand, pinched between my thumb and my index finger. And let me try to get the tips a little more aligned there. And then I'm going to measure. And I usually want the tail, as in most cases, to be approximately the same length as the hook shank. So once I've got the proper measurement, I'm going to switch hands. I'm going to do my pinch method to get them to sit right on top of the hook shank. And then usually I can wrap right over the butts of that feather, and the tail is secured. Bada book, bada bing, easy. Next, we're going to build the body of this fly with yellow floss. And of course, I'm just going to use good old 4-strand rayon floss here. Cut all 4 strands, and again, I'm going to lay it alongside. I'm going to lash it to the hook shank, and then I'm going to wrap my thread back to the bend of the hook to ensure that the body of this fly starts right at the bend of the hook where the tail ends. So once I've got the 4 strands of floss secured to the hook, and I make sure that I've wrapped back to the bend, so when I start to wrap the floss, that's where the body starts. And then I'm going to bring my thread forward to about the 3/4 point on the hook shank. typical for just about any kind of nymph, where I'm going to have a body and then a thorax. And then I'm going to take all 4 strands of this floss and I'm going to wrap it all together. And when you're wrapping a floss body, you'll notice that I'm kind of pulling on the floss as I wrap it. As such, that kind of keeps it from spreading apart on me, those 4 strands. And then as I wrap it, I will try to give some semblance of taper like we do with most nymphs or even dry flies. I want there to be just a semblance of taper to this. And then right there at approximately that 3/4 point where my thread is hanging, I'm going to switch hands, and I've got the floss coming up at a slight angle, and I'm going to take my left hand or my opposite hand, and I'm going to throw that thread over that floss 3 or maybe 4 times. And that should secure the floss in there, and then I can come in with my fine point scissors and trim that floss. Easy. And now comes for Brian's ram-free magic dubbing. And we're just going to build a simple dubbed thorax out of this. And we want it to be fairly robust. This is a big feature of this fly. Obviously, it was for Austin and Skews and those that fished this fly back at the turn of the century. But I'm just going to take a little wisp of this dubbing mix and apply it to the thread. Remember that the key to dubbing is being very sparse. Most people who dub put way too much on. In fact, I may have a little too much. I think our good friend Kelly Gallup always says that you should be able to throw it up in the air and it floats. And that's about the right amount. Of course, I'm going to use a little bit more. So I create my dubbing rope, maybe about 2.5 to 3 inches long, somewhere in there for this size 14. And then I'm just going to start to wrap this thorax. And I'll wrap towards the eye of the hook, and then I'll wrap back over it, trying to just build up a little bit of a thorax. And if you have to go back over the yellow floss a little bit to get your proportions right, there's no problem with that. As long as your thread doesn't show, should be fine. And then I'm going to bring my thread forward to just behind the eye. Now, making sure that you've left enough room there at the head. Make sure that you don't have that dubbing jammed right tight up against the head. Now, we're just going to put a collar of soft hackle on there. I usually do about approximately 3 turns or so. And I'm going to select a smaller feather as opposed to that larger feather that we used for the tail. I'm going to select one of the smaller feathers. I usually don't measure because it's just not critical. And after you do a couple of dozen of them, you're going to be able to kind of select that feather. Now, for those of you that have seen me tie soft hackles, and we're going to be doing a lot more of this. We'll be talking a lot about soft hackles and tying some more moving forward here. I do this a little bit differently than Sylvester Neames did in the book, and a little bit differently than you may have seen elsewhere. And this is a technique that was taught to me by Davy Watton. Davy's a legendary fly tyer from Wales, and he's actually down on the White River and one of the best fly tyers of all time, and really taught me a ton. But this is probably the best thing he ever taught me. The first thing I'm going to do is just to make this feather a little easier to work with and a little easier to wrap, I'm going to strip off all of this kind of webby stuff down below. I really don't want that stuff, so I strip it off, and it just gives me a nice, pretty feather. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a really fine pair of tweezers. And I have found that these are perfect for this application. These are called the Bishop forceps. They're made by Dr. Slick, and I'm absolutely sure you can find them at madriveroutfitters.com. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab the stem of this feather by the tip. And I just reach right in, grab that feather by the tip. And now I'm going to hold it here in my right hand. I'm going to take my left hand and I'm going to stroke all those barbules of this feather. I'm going to stroke them backwards. Okay? That leaves you with a little triangle up at the tip of that feather, and then everything else, all the barbules behind, are stroked backwards. Now I can come in with my fine point scissors. I can trim that until I leave just a tiny little triangle, or I believe that Davy called it a nipple of feather, just to kind of stay in the vein of this video. You've got a little nipple there up top, or an upside down triangle. Now I'm going to use that upside down triangle and I'm going to tie this feather in by the tip. And the reason for that is, number one, the stem is much finer and much easier to wrap. And number two, as Davey explained, and this made so much sense, the shorter fibers of that feather are the ones that go on first, and then the longer fibers go over top. If you do it reverse, you've got the longer fibers first and then the shorter fibers, which are going to be stiffer, and they could impede the action and the movement of those fibers. So that was a huge revelation to me, and really changed the way I tie soft hackles, and I think the way my soft hackles fish on the water. So here's what you're going to do. I move my thread a little bit out of the way, and I lay that little triangle right up underside of the hook shank. And then you can come in with your thread. Sometimes it's tricky, and with that magic dubbing formula there, kind of in the way, it can be a little tricky. Let me clean that out a little bit. Just come right up under the hook shank with your triangle. Get one little fiber out of there. And boom, I had it. There it is. Okay, I just trapped it right underside and maybe give 2 or 3 turns. This is one of the reasons why I use a fairly fine thread here. And now it's tied in. Again, I took 2 or 3 turns over top. That little triangle was right up underside the hook shank, and then I come in with my thread, and now I can take my hackle feather and gently make, there's one. And with this, I don't worry about getting it perfectly in line. I just kind of put 2 or 3 turns in there. But here's another technique, is you take your thumb and your index finger and you stroke all those fibers backwards so that you get a nice clean shot at that space between your dubbing and the eye of the fly. Stroke them backwards, and then I'm going to come up with this angle here, as I normally do, to tie a material off. And I'll go 1, 2, 3 turns, tie that feather off, and then I should be able to come in with my fine point scissors and hit that stem and trim the feather. Okay? And now, you've heard me say this before, the sign of a well-tied fly is a well-proportioned head. So I'm going to build a decent-looking head on this fly, and in doing so, I'm going to lay those hackle feathers back a little bit so they lay along the body and they're not sticking straight out like dry fly hackle. So all you do is just take your thumb and your index finger, try to get all of them if you can, and now you got a nice clean shot at forming a head on this fly, and it kind of lays those hackle fibers. I might even take them back a little bit further. There we go. Just about perfect. And we're ready to finish the fly. Really simple, and I don't have my really good half hitch tool here, but we'll try to use this one. And I just come in, as you know, I'm not a big whip finish tool guy, but I just use my half hitch tool, go around twice. And there you go. I do like to put a little bit of head cement on here, which I don't think I have right here. But of course, you're going to just dip your bodkin in that head cement, put a little bit on the head of that fly. Just helps keep it a little bit more secure. And so there you have it. There is the Tups Indispensable wet fly. Again, when I tie the dry fly version of this, it's basically the same exact fly. It's just that you're going to tie in a dry fly hackle before you make the thorax. And then you're going to take about 3 or 4 turns of the dry fly hackle. And again, I use the done dry fly hackle. Just wrap it over top of that thorax. Don't even bother with any wings. And you've got a really great sulfur / attractor dry fly. And then when I tie the nymph, I use I think it's called lateral scale, or you can even use Flechsig to fold over for the wing case. And then of course, as I do with most wing cases these days, I put a little UV on the back. And then I do put some legs and I tie them in on the sides. And I use the fibers from the hen saddle there. So there you have it. Again, it's a fly that I've been using for years and years and years. It's a legendary fly with a really pretty amazing and, needless to say, interesting history. I've had great success with it despite the fact that I don't use the wool from the ram's testicle, and I now have taken to using Senyo's laser dub. So there you have it, friends. That's a wet fly that should be in your box. You might even try the nymph and the dry fly. Just great attractor flies, but they do work very well when sulfurs and light colored mayflies are hatching. So hope you enjoyed it. As usual, stay tuned. Again, we've got a lot of soft hackle stuff. We're going to be tying more soft hackles. I'm going to be talking more about them, and we're going to get out on the water and show you some cool stuff on how I fish with these. So stay tuned for that. And as always, remember to subscribe, hit that like button, and stay tuned. We've got a lot more coming at you. If you like this video, hit subscribe. It helps out a lot. And check out these videos. We think you might like them too.